You know, I've been talking a lot lately about faith. And sometimes we have this feeling that we have this God-given vision within us and that it will easily come to pass because God has given it to us. Just like in the old fairy tales, you know, they got married and they lived happily ever after. But what happens in real life is we get the dream, we get the vision, then comes the delay. And for many of us, we get the dream and then life descends into a struggle. We live in an instant world which promises us instant success. We read about people who have achieved, every week we seem to open the paper and read the story of another entrepreneur who's made not $1 million but billions of dollars and so on, and we think, well, wouldn't it be lovely if that was us? God, where is it? What's going to happen? We live in this instant world. Instant promises. But you know, we can draw a lot of comfort from biblical examples. God gave Noah a dream that one day a deluge would strike the earth and he would need an ark to survive. It took Noah 100 years to build that ark, and 100 years of enduring the know-alls and the scoffers and the detractors, and then the deluge. We read in Genesis 37 onward of the story of Joseph, who had a wonderful dream and vision for his life. But it was 30 years before the fulfillment of that dream came to fruition and he became Prime Minister of Egypt, which was the then world power. He went through horrendous challenges, kidnapped by his own family, placed in prison unjustly. I wonder how he felt after, so many years in prison, living at the bottom of the heap. But God said to him one day, your life's going to account to something. It's all very well looking back today and looking at the scripture and said, well, of course he should have had faith in God. We know what happened. But the point was, he didn't know. All he had was the vision that God had given to him in his life. I wonder where he was after a couple of years in prison. God, where's the dream? Where are you? God, you promised this and nothing has happened. Then we turn to David. David was anointed by the prophet Samuel as a young lad, led to be the future king of Israel. David then spent the next 17 years of his life being hounded by Saul, being threatened by Saul, with Saul attempting to assassinate him at every turn. He was on the run. I wonder how he felt after 16 years of being on the run. God, you made me a promise of being king, and here I am, I'm being chased and hounded for my very life. I wonder how he felt about God's promise of being king. I could go on with other Old Testament examples and even into the New Testament of Paul. We'll talk about that next week. But what I'm saying today is it's easy for us to look back on these Old Testament promises or Old Testament examples and think, well, they got out of it. They shouldn't have worried. But the point was, the day before Joseph got released from prison, he didn't know he was going to be released. Are you getting the point? How do you feel where you are now, the situation that you are now? And you're saying, God, where is the release? It could be tomorrow, it could be a week later, it could be a year later, it could be 10 years' time, but whatever it is, God's promised that to you. Likewise, David didn't know until the day of Saul's death that God was going to fulfill his promise. You see, it's faith that reaches forward to the promise of the vision and lives now in that promise. That's the key. Faith always lives in the promise. It doesn't live in the now, but it lives in the now by the promise. That's what faith is. God has given us a vision for this church. We've been covidedly delayed, but the best is yet to come. Visions are always tested, and the greater the vision, the greater the testing. If a vision is from God, the enemy will always test it. If your vision's not tested, then it ain't from God. And it's only by faith that we can hold on to the vision that God has given us. Why are there always delays in dreams? Why is that? Have you ever asked yourself, why is the dream always delayed? We don't get the dream when we want it. Why not? I've always said my greatest problem with God is, I want to ask him, why were you always late? You never gave me what I wanted when I wanted it. Ever felt like that? You're in good company. You've got me there. Why doesn't God give us what we want when we want it? I'm always reminded of Exodus 13, verse 17. And this is what it says. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go. This is talking about the exodus of Israel out of Egypt. Came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. God took them on a circuitous route. If they had gone straight into the promised land, it was a journey of about 2 weeks. There were 2 reasons that God delays the dream. Because firstly, God always uses delays to prepare us. And the children of Israel needed to be trained in warfare to face the opposition in the promised land. And secondly, God is testing each one of us individually. Of the 2.5 million people that came out of Egypt, only 2 earned the right to enter the promised land. Anything worthwhile will always be tested. The greater the dream, the greater the test. And the most valuable item today in the world, the thing that is valued much in our lives, particularly for the ladies, is diamonds. But a diamond, we have learned, is only created under pressure. And the simile is this, is that only the things that really matter the most in life are created under pressure. So don't despise testings. Don't despise delays. There are 4 things that we need to learn as we walk through a time of pressure, as we see the vision ahead of us. These 4 things are this: don't fret, don't fear, don't faint, and don't forget. So the first point is don't fear. And I'm going to go through the story of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt to learn these lessons. Let's read some verses of Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. It says this: nevertheless, you would not go up, but you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, and you complained in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakim there. Sons of Anakim were giants in the land. They were a very tall people. All they could see was problems in the promised land. They couldn't see the vision that God had given to them. And here's the children of Israel who'd been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years, but here was their problem. They had enough faith to get out, but they didn't have enough faith to get in. They had faith to follow Moses out of Egypt because of the troubles they were in, but then they didn't have enough faith to get into God's promised land. Moses had taken them out of Egypt, but they wandered for 40 years waiting to go into the promised land. You know, fear always prolongs your wilderness experience. Fear is the opposite of faith. They were afraid of what they were going to face. So God left them in the wilderness until they gained enough faith to enter into the vision that God had given them. God had given them their own real piece of real estate in this earth. So do not fear. Instead, focus on the presence of God in your life. That's what you focus on. Deuteronomy 1:41. Then you answered and said to me, we have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight just as the Lord our God commanded us. And when every one of you had girded on his weapons of war, you were ready to go up into the mountain. God is in essence in saying these verses, I'm with you. That's all you need. I am with you. It is often said that there are 365 times in the Bible it says, don't be afraid. One for every day of the week. Got to remember this year's a leap year, so I wonder where the 366th one is. But anyway, what we have to do is not fear, but trust God. He will always work the circumstances out if you put your faith in him. So don't fear. That's the first thing. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. Secondly, don't fret. Numbers 21, 4-5. Then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of the land of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. They complained. You know, I've got one thing I don't like in life. I don't like queues and I don't like crowds. You know, today if there's a big rugby match on, I'd rather go with a couple of mates and watch it on the TV than go to Eden Park and fight for parking and seats and food. I wouldn't. It's a self-inflicted pain to have to go and watch it. Plus you get a better view on TV. But when we go through tough times in our eagerness to see the dream come to pass, we tend to try and give God a hand. There's something innate in us. We want to help God get the vision done. The Bible has many examples of this. And perhaps the most important one, which we go back to always, is Abraham and Sarah. God made them a promise when Abraham was 75 years old and childless. He said, you're going to have a son. So a bit of time goes by and nothing happens. So Sarah decides she'd give God a hand, and she gives Abraham her handmaid Hagar. And she has a child called Ishmael. And today, the world is reverberating with the problems that arise from that decision. Ishmael was no miracle kid. In fact, he became the head of that great nation, the Arabs, and today the world is still suffering from the tension between the descendants of Ishmael and his younger brother who came later, Isaac. Isaac came along 15 years later, the son of promise, the miracle baby of a 90-year-old woman. You know, Abraham failed. And so we today have uproar in the Middle East between the descendants of Isaac, the Jews, and Ishmael, the Arabs. And Proverbs 19 verse 2 says, and he sins who hastens with his feet. Think about that. He sins who hastens with his feet. Which means that impatience will get you into trouble. But instead, when we read in Psalm 27, 7 and 8, the psalmist says, hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy on me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, my face, Lord, will I seek. So when you're in the middle of a crisis, always remember Jesus in the boat. I love this. When the tempest was raging, Jesus was asleep. The moral of the story is this: when there's a crisis coming, what do? Go to bed. Have a rest. Trust God. That's the key. Instead of getting up trying to sort it out ourselves, we need to sleep well and trust God. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, He has made everything beautiful in His time. Just relax and believe that God's going to bring beauty out of the chaos. So don't fear, don't fret, and thirdly, don't faint. Trials can become very wearisome, very tiring. Numbers 14, 2-4. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land and to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. You know, I think the saddest phrase in English, in the English language, is if only. If only. I think about times in my life when I should have changed a decision. And I think back in the if onlys. The if onlys only bring pain in your life. That's all they ever bring. They never bring happiness. They always try and take you back to the good old days. We often hear about the good old days. Do you remember them? I do. They were awful. Remember the cars we used to have in the good old days? I remember when my dad got his first new car. Here we go. This will date me. Back in the early 1950s, it was a Ford Prefect. And the roads in those days, and we used to travel from Rotorua through to Te Puke over an old unsealed road. And it was full of bends and bumps and dust. And it seemed the journey, as kids, we didn't think the journey would ever end. It was terrible. Today you do it in 20 minutes, it's fun. But those days it was hard going. There's lots of things in the good old days. We have very selective memory as to the good old days. You know, I'm looking forward to next year. It's impossible to be as bad as this year. I'm excited about next year. Are you excited about next year? I am. I'm looking forward to a great year of fulfillment of God's promise. You know, the children of Israel, they were fearful of the unknown. All they had to do was step out in faith and they would have enjoyed the future. But they failed to do that. They wanted to return to the past. Let's select another leader and go back into Egypt. Go back into slavery. Go back into the despair we had. They were fearful of what lay ahead. They would rather give up the dream of freedom and go back into slavery than risk the future. So many of us do that. It's like a death wish. You can counsel with some people until you're blue in the face, but they will always turn back to their slavery. The Apostle Paul writes very graphically, I think it's in 2 Peter, where he says you can take a pig, you can wash it, you can dress it up, you can put a bow tie and a tuxedo on it, but as soon as you open the door, it'll head for the mud again. And people revert to the slavery of habits, the slavery of despair, the slavery of mediocre, and the slavery of the fear of the future. We've got to move forward. No matter how difficult, no matter how challenging this past year has been, God has got good things for you up ahead in the year ahead. Get into faith and start walking with him in it. Many, if not most churches, do exactly this. They, in the journey, we're committed to the future because we have a dream. We have a vision. And we identify with what the Apostle Paul writes in Galatians 6 verse 9. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not lose heart. In due season we will reap if we do not lose heart. As Jesus said to his disciples in Luke 18 verse 1, pray continually and do not lose heart. In other words, what he's really saying is this: it doesn't mean you're going around muttering prayer all the time. It's walking around with your heart in tune with the Spirit. That's what prayer is. Talking to God all the time, being in tune with him, and saying, as the more we focus on him, the more our faith will grow. So when delays occur, don't fear. Don't fear what lies up ahead. Don't fret. Don't worry about what you think will happen. You know, I have a good friend of mine, and she always says these things: I wonder what's going to happen. And I always say to her, I never wonder what's going to happen. I just trust God. It's in his hands. You know, there's the phrase, I wonder what's going to happen, is, oh, where are we? My faith is found and set upon a rock, Jesus Christ. And don't faint. Look forward, not back. Don't be wearied by the task. And the last point is, don't forget. You know, when there's delays, we tend to forget the dream. We tend to forget the vision. And we tend to forget the excitement when it was birthed, and then we turn to whom we can blame. If we don't get what we want, we always want to blame somebody else for the reason why we haven't got what we want. Psalm 106 verse 7, our fathers in Egypt did not understand your wonders. They did not remember the multitude of your miracles, but rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. You know, I remember many years ago when I was beginning ministry, I had an assistant pastor who came to me and said to me, you said we'd have a church building up. And here we are, I've been with you 5 years, we've got no church building. So I'm leaving you. I'm going to start my own church. I'm going to join up with another organisation. The interesting thing was, 2 years later, we had a church building. And 5 years later, he went into rented premises and the church folded. You've got to have a vision. You've got to trust the vision. You've got to always keep the vision fresh. There are reasons often why God delays a vision, but at the end it will always come to pass. We need to grasp hold of the vision that God has given to us as a church and work passionately to see it come to pass. The children of Israel couldn't wait for God to act. We need to remember that what God promises, he always performs. We are here. We might only be a little church at this time, but God has promised us that if we do the vision that God has given to us, we will grow. And we're going to grow. That's God just saying yes. We are going to grow. and we're going to see the Spirit of God move, and we are going to follow the Spirit of God. One of the things that I'm concerned about and has been really exercised about is that we lock into what God is telling us and how we follow the Spirit of God and follow the vision that He's given to us. So let's trust God and believe God and press Him, because it's going to come to pass. It will happen. What God promises, He always performs. The children of Israel couldn't wait for God to act. He always performs, not in our time, but in His time. And God wants to take our dream, our vision, and bless it. He wants to take your dream, your own personal dream, and bless it. That you'll find you'll need to be patient and wait for it. You know, in the Old Testament, there is a great series of verses found in Habakkuk chapter 2. It's a hard book to find at times, but it's one of the minor prophets. And in verse 3, it says this. It says, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time." I like that word. It is for an appointed time. God has got a plan and a purpose for your vision and our collective vision. But at the end, it will speak. It will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. To tarry means to wait. I like this translation best in Moffat's translation. And it says this: "The vision has its own appointed hour. It ripens, it will flower. If it be long, then wait. If it is sure, it will not be late." You know, the picture we're given here is your vision is like the bud of a flower. And we need to wait for it, because at the appointed time, in the right season, it's going to burst forth into all its beauty and all its glory. Now, it doesn't do that without the vision being tended, without the plant being looked after. You need to keep it healthy. You need to feed it. And we need to do that the same thing with the vision that God has given to us. We need to tend the vision. We need to pray. We need to wait on God. We need to do more than that. We need then to step out and work at the vision. Work at it. No vision will ever come to pass unless you work at it. And so we are called to work at the vision that God has called to us. So begin to imagine your dream. Begin to imagine our vision as the bud of a beautiful flower, just waiting for the right time to burst into its radiant beauty. And that's where we're going as a church in reaching out to the lost of this city. Love the delay. Listen to God. This year has been a challenge, but love the delay. This year has been a time when I have seen God work in my own life like He's never worked before. What a challenge. What a challenge to hear God. What a challenge to trust God. What a challenge to say, God, it's not how old I am or how young I am. What it is about me walking in faith in your vision. That's what it is. And I sense that there are people here today who are going to see a year ahead, which is really going to give them something of what they've dreamt of for years. Do you trust God? Do you believe God in that? I do. Let's just pray. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you that you're a God who never forgets, even though we forget. You're a God who never faints, even though we get tired. You're a God who never frets, never worries, because you're in control. And God, we just thank you that you are the God who loves us and cares for us in a way we'll never understand. Father, I thank you that you've given us a vision, both collectively as a church, and also you've given us a vision individually. And Father, I pray this morning for those who is listening to this, that sense in their own heart that their vision is being delayed. And God, they've said to you, even in the past week, God, what's happening? Where are you going? God, I just pray right now that by your Spirit, you'd begin to minister your vision, encourage them by your Spirit, regardless of the time, that they might be encouraged to see that vision come to pass.